Hello! Today's stories come from r/Am I the Butthole. We've been on the drama train lately, and today is the next stop. We have 3 wild and hefty stories of utter entitlement with something sweet at the end. Our first story isn't AITA, but did ask for a judgment after a woman who has her life saved by a heroic dog was shunned by her family, whom she believes is trying to avoid giving her support. Story 1 is titled, "My dog attacked my stalker after he broke into my house. Now, my sister-in-law says my dog is too dangerous to be around my niece. Feel like I'm going crazy." This is kind of a complicated story, but I'll just get into it. I used to be in this controlling, kind of abusive relationship. When I finally broke it off a year ago, my ex started showing up places, trying to get me to take him back. Eventually, it developed into full-on stalking. He would show up at my work and took to just waiting outside of it after he was banned, leave notes on my car when I was at the grocery store, leave all kinds of flowers outside my house, and then stick angry notes on my door after he saw me throw them in the trash. Wrote me all kinds of weird, obsessive emails and letters. I've had to change my phone number 3 times. The behavior escalated over time and got scarier and more threatening. In one instance, he started a small fire in my driveway, but the police couldn't get enough evidence connecting him to it. It was after that instance that I put cameras in my yard. I previously only had them pointing at my doors. I was horrified to learn that the police couldn't do a thing about any of this until my stalker actually was caught doing something illegal, like breaking into my house, at which point I might already be dead. I decided I wasn't spending the rest of my life waiting for the other shoe to drop, so I got a handgun and a concealed carry permit, took some self-defense courses, and started doing strength training. I also looked into getting an attack dog. But after all the money I'd sunk into my other methods of protection, they were prohibitively expensive. So I went to my local animal shelter and got the scariest, meanest-looking dog I could find. This is where Thor comes in. He's a 100-pound American bulldog. Looks like he'd rip your throat out on sight, but is basically a gigantic teddy bear. He loves every person he's ever met, is incredibly sweet and gentle with my 4-year-old niece, enjoys other animals, and even loves the mailman. I just kind of accepted that he probably wouldn't do anything to protect me from my stalker, but it didn't matter that much because having such a huge dog made me so much more confident. I brought Thor everywhere I could and was working on getting him trained enough to be an emotional support animal so I could bring him inside places with me. I absolutely would not do this until he was trained well enough to not disrupt a regular service dog. Last month, I woke up in the middle of the night to Thor whining. I was groggy and thought he had to go to the bathroom, so I got out of bed and opened the door. At that point, my house alarm went off, and pretty soon after that, I was face to face with my stalker. I started screaming and went to run for my gun. Before I could do anything, though, Thor ran across the room in full attack mode. The memory is really blurry for me, but there was blood all over my living room, and I remember my stalker was eventually able to escape, at which point Thor chased him outside and then came back to me. When the police showed up, they said Thor was a hero who'd probably saved my life. I don't want to list what they found in my stalker's car after they caught him, and I'm shaking a little as I type this. But I'm sure he was going to bring me somewhere and kill me. It looks like he's going to prison for a long time, though, so my nightmare is over. Pretty much everyone in my family thinks Thor is a hero, except my sister-in-law. She and my brother have a 4-year-old niece, the one I mentioned above, and she says she doesn't want Thor around her child anymore. She says since Thor has snapped in the past, he could do it again, so he's not safe to have around kids. We used to see each other a few times a week before she decided Thor was dangerous. The way she words this makes me really angry because Thor didn't snap. He saw a stranger break into his home, heard his owner scream in terror, and reacted to defend me, himself, and his house. Nothing about that screams dangerous around children to me, unless my niece is also going to break into my house and threaten me. This is also a very emotional issue for me because Thor isn't just a dog to me. He's my safe place, my hero, the one who protected me and kept me safe when no one else could. I've also gotten increasingly anxious since this happened, and I can't go anywhere without Thor. I barely leave my house, pay to pick up my groceries from the store instead of going in because I know Thor isn't allowed inside. And all my friends know that if Thor isn't welcome in their house, I'm not coming over either. although they're perfectly welcome to come hang out at my house instead. I am really going through it and am working with a therapist to overcome this. Luckily, my office is still fully remote, but I need to be able to go back to work once in person again. But I really need my brother and sister-in-law's support. I think my sister-in-law thinks I'm just pouting, and that's why I won't just leave the dog home and come over without him. I don't know how to explain to them that the fear hasn't stopped just because my stalker is in jail. It's actually a lot worse than it was before. I've already suggested they come over and I crate Thor, but that wasn't good enough for her. What can I do to make her understand the situation better? Update. I definitely didn't expect my last post to blow up the way it did. Thank you so much to everyone who commented. I appreciated that I got advice from all over the spectrum, from people who completely agreed with me to people who completely agreed with my sister-in-law, and people who thought both of us had a point. It helped me to see that the problem is more complicated than I thought, which helped me understand that my sister-in-law wasn't just being a birch tree. It also helped me decide what things were and weren't fair to be angry about. I also appreciated seeing a few people comment making fun of me for needing my dog with me, and the majority of people yelling at them and saying I was acting pretty reasonably for someone who endured a violent attack. I don't want to be seen as someone delicate, and I'm glad that most people don't see me that way. Reading everyone's comments, I had this moment where I was like, yeah, they're right. I did almost get dragged out of my house and murdered just a few weeks ago. Who the heck are these people to say how I should act? That felt really good, and I really appreciated it. Anyway, the conclusion I came to in all of this is that while my sister-in-law is well within her rights to protect her daughter, she went about it in a way that disrespected me, both as a friend and as a victim of a very recent violent attack. Both my parents and her parents live locally and babysit all the time. She and my brother could have easily dropped my niece off with them and came to visit. It probably would have been a while before I even noticed my niece wasn't coming around, at which point I would have been in a better place, and more understanding that she was uncomfortable with her daughter around Thor. Regardless of what some people said about how my sister-in-law and brother don't owe me anything, and all their allegiance goes to their daughter, I simply do not feel that way. We were extremely close before this happened. I was always there for them and would literally drop plans to babysit my niece if my brother and sister-in-law needed nights to themselves. The very least they could have done for me, after I was almost kidnapped and murdered, is try to find some compromise. We went from seeing each other 3 times a week to pretty much not seeing each other at all. Even if they weren't okay with me crating the dog, they could have easily dropped their daughter off with grandparents for a few hours so I wouldn't feel completely isolated. I also have a yard, so they could have come over with her and we all could have hung out outside while Thor stayed inside. I've been upset about this for a while, but wasn't sure if I was right to be upset until so many people echoed that sentiment, so I appreciate it. I invited my brother and sister-in-law over. I promised it would only be an hour or two and insisted they leave my niece with my parents, and tried to lay all this out without being confrontational or acting mean. To my surprise, my brother and sister-in-law had no real understanding that I've been having a difficult time. They thought I was basically fine and everything in my life was more or less back to normal now that my stalker is in jail. I didn't get into it in my previous post, but during the year that I was stalked, I worked really hard to not show many outward signs of fear and even had jokes about having a stalker. I knew people wouldn't want to hang out with someone who was constantly going on and on about some bad thing that was going on in their life. And I didn't want to be that person who was perpetually in crisis. And more than that, I just didn't want to always be thinking and talking about having a stalker. I wanted to not think about it as much as possible. So I guess I might have come off as unaffected by the whole thing. I'm not sure if I totally buy that they didn't know I was going through something traumatic and that it was taking a huge toll on my mental state. I mean, I got a gun and paid for tactical training. I bought a home security system. I got active in self-defense classes and strength training, things that I previously had no interest in. Even if I wasn't walking around telling everyone how scared I was, I think anyone would have been able to tell. Plus, who just brushes off having their house broken into in the middle of the night? It seems crazy, and they don't seem so emotionally unintelligent that they'd think that. But both my brother and sister-in-law did apologize for being insensitive. And when I pressed my sister-in-law on why crating the dog isn't good enough, she eventually relented and said that it's fine. It probably helped that the entire time they were over, Thor was asleep and loudly snoring in his crate. The paranoid part of me is convinced they just don't want to deal with me in a fragile state, made up an excuse about my dog, and are now just going to come up with some other excuse about why they can't see me. I invited them over for dinner in a few days and they're coming, so I guess I'll just have to see from there. I can't stress enough that these used to be my best friends, and I'm heartbroken to have not had their support. I've been trying to rely on my friends more now, and thankfully, they've all been really supportive. I'm really lucky that this happened during the pandemic because nobody is getting frustrated with me that I've basically refused to leave the house for a month. They're all perfectly happy to pick up takeout and come over to watch TV for the fifth night in a row. In other news, yesterday I left my dog at home and drove around my block alone. I was shaking the whole time, but I did it. I keep trying to remind myself that I spent a whole year fighting back even though I was utterly terrified. I can't just lay down and die now that I'm so close to getting my life back. I can't even imagine having to go through this. OP was super resilient. She also remained super self aware and wasn't wallowing in it. I don't actually think she could have handled it any better. What is with her brother and sister in law? They seem like a bunch of jerks. They should want their daughter to spend more time with their fierce aunt. The second story has malicious entitlement vibes. I don't know if that's a thing, but I'm steaming ahead with it. OP refuses to help an entitled sibling with mental health issues she suspects are fake. Story 2 is titled, Am I the jerk for not helping my disabled sister with college? I'm a 24-year-old female and have 4 siblings, Max, male 31, Lisa, female 20, Chris, male 20, and Emily, female 18. Emily is disabled, and because of that, my parents dedicated themselves 100% to her, leaving the rest of us to fend for ourselves. When Max left for college, I became the main caregiver for my siblings, and all household chores were my responsibility. I want to make it clear that Emily's disability does not stop her from functioning like any other person, and she doesn't require any assistance or supervision or 24/7 care. However, my parents have always spoiled her rotten, and she is very rude, mean, and entitled. My parents raised her with the mentality that her disability means she's allowed to do whatever, and everyone needs to bend backwards for her. My grandparents passed away 3 years ago, and I inherited everything, approximately $6 million. They were very well off, I know. The reasons I received all of it are because, when my grandparents were sick, Max contacted them after almost 10 years of silence because he wanted to know how much he will receive. I'm no contact with him, by the way. They were very aware of how my mom treated me and my siblings, and she was disowned. They were very religious, and Lisa came out as bi at 14, and Chris came out as gay at 17. I went no contact with my parents after I moved for college, and when Lisa and Chris started college, I offered to cover all of their living and educational expenses, as long as they do well in school. They gladly accepted. I also helped my best friend Lola, female 21, start her own business. I haven't spoken to my parents in 6 years. I haven't blocked them, they just never called or texted. This year, Emily started college, and she burned out all of her college fund in less than 4 months because she is a spoiled brat and bags were more important than rent. In addition, she is doing horrible in school because she isn't even attending her classes, and she will most likely be expelled or held back. My mom called me 2 weeks ago to not ask, but demand that I do for her the same I do for Lisa and Chris. I said no because growing up, I was literally a slave for her and my parents. I'm helping Lisa and Chris because they are the only ones that treated me as family. I ended the call by telling her that for 18 years, Emily was their only kid. So now, they have no right to demand anything from the kids they practically abandoned. Now I'm getting dumped on by everyone, except Lisa and Chris, because I'm causing unnecessary drama. I'm causing a rift between Emily and her siblings. Emily will be the only one without a degree. It's not really my money, and my grandparents would want me to help her. Then why didn't they leave anything for her? Family is family, and I should help my little sister. I don't buy into that garbage. It's not her fault that my parents were bad parents to me. True, but she doesn't do anything to change her behavior. She's disabled, and it's not okay to discriminate. What the heck? I feel like I'm doing the right thing, but everyone is telling me I'm not. So am I the jerk? Edit. I received a lot of messages with questions and a few asked in the comments about my sister's disability, so I'm going to answer some questions. What disability does she have? I don't know. My parents never told me, and when anyone asked, they would get very defensive. Can't Emily get governmental assistance? No, because she doesn't have documentation that attests she's disabled. I'm sorry, but that's crazy. I remember my parents fighting about taking my sister to different doctors because they all refused to sign she was disabled. Why doesn't the rest of my family pay for her? Because they are living paycheck to paycheck because they would spend thousands on buying Emily whatever she wanted. Why can't my parents continue paying? Because Emily's spending problem got worse since she left home, and the rest of the family is no longer in the position to give them money. Also, my dad got in a work accident a few months ago and he was forced to retire, so now their income has significantly reduced. How can someone spend that much? Simple. She renewed her closet, purchased a very expensive car, and just partied until she dropped. For reference, my parents have high paying jobs, and Emily's college fund was around $587,000 when I left for college. Oh my gosh. Did me and my siblings have a college fund? Nope. We all worked our butts off to get scholarships so we can go. And I do have a will in place. If anything happens to me, all the assets will be split equally between Lisa, Chris, Lola, and an organization fighting for wildlife. FYI, writing these, I'm starting to question if my sister is actually disabled, or if it was just what my parents wanted to believe. I mean, if no doctor would declare her disabled, is she really? My family thinks she's disabled because she didn't learn how to walk until she was 5 and she didn't talk until she was 7. Maybe she was just a slow developer? Update. So, funny thing, my favorite uncle called me a couple hours after I made the post to tell me to block my family because they have come up with a plan to get me to pay. He didn't know what the plan was, he just heard a portion of the conversation between my mom and my aunt. And just like he said, my mom called a few minutes later to tell me Emily is pregnant, so I need to help her because if I don't, I'm damaging my niece or nephew. I'm crying with how hard I started laughing. And I just told her to F off. I blocked them all. But seriously, fake a pregnancy? Laugh my butt off. OP provided a couple extra details in the comments. Tangled Doctopus said she spent $587,000 in 4 months. Weird, but in a good way, added, this is why she hasn't been going to class. Spending that kind of money would be a full-time job. OP replied, she went on more vacations than classes. Laugh my butt off. Ella D shared, not the jerk. Emily has too much time on her hands as it is. If she really wants to attend college, she can get a job and take a few classes. Giving money to her at this point would be giving money to Louis Vuitton. Creeves added, Emily is on her way to getting expelled. Just sit back and let it happen. Not the jerk. Max said, not the jerk, but I'd buy that uncle a nice watch or something for Christmas as a thank you for the heads up. OP replied, I was actually thinking of buying him a car, since his is very old, and thus unsafe to drive. Definitely not the jerk. It sounds like OP's parents hindered Emily's development in a way that made her incapable of adulting in any way, shape, or form. The grandparents saw it, and everyone knows it, and OP should not have to pay for it. She is doing her part in taking care of the family in a way that totally makes sense to me. It's not vengeful. She's just protecting herself and her siblings from their crazy parents. Our third story is the shortest and the sweetest with a happy ending. It just had an update, and it's just what we need to stay on track. Story 3 is titled, Am I the jerk for selling out on my grandma's secret recipe? My grandma was a wonderful baker and had a secret cake recipe that she had created herself. It used some very uncommon spice combinations in the cake and frosting that produced a very unique but delicious cake. She would always make it for our big family gatherings, and it was always the most popular dessert. When she got sick a couple years ago, she decided to share the recipe so that it wouldn't die with her, and offered to give it to any kids or grandkids who wanted it. I was the only one who asked for it before she died. I don't know why no one else did, as there were several other bakers in the family. After she passed, I took over bringing the cake to family gatherings, and everyone was happy to still be able to enjoy it. I also started making cakes for friends and family, and then for others by word of mouth, to make some extra cash on the side. My business was really starting to pick up around the time the pandemic hit, as people who'd had my cakes recommended me to their own friends and family. It soon became too much to keep up with in my tiny home kitchen, so I reached out to a friend who had a catering business with a professional kitchen. Since her business took a big hit with COVID, I made a deal to use her kitchen to make my cakes and help supplement the takeout business she started to get by. My cousin, Jane, recently found out that Grandma's recipe was one of my best sellers and said that I had no right to sell Grandma's recipe, especially after keeping it to myself. She had asked for it late last year, but I said no. I told her that she had the chance to get it from Grandma before she died and didn't seem to care enough to bother then. Since Jane had lost her job, she had decided to try selling cakes too, which I think is why she had asked for the recipe. Unfortunately for her, it's not going well. The reviews on her cakes have not been good. and no one has been recommending her. Jane said that the only reason my business was doing well was because of Grandma's cake, which she wanted to sell too, and my access to a professional kitchen. The kitchen does help with being able to work on multiple orders at once, but my business is doing well because I actually make good cakes. Jane is a good cook, but not a good baker. She doesn't follow measurements properly and instead does everything to taste, which works for cooking, but not baking. Using too much or too little of any ingredients like flour, eggs, or butter, or even their starting temperature will not give you the result you want. Jane is demanding that I either stop selling Grandma's cake or teach her the recipe so she can too. I refused and said she was a hypocrite for wanting to sell the cake herself after getting angry at me for doing so. When she gave me the recipe, Grandma said that her biggest regret was never opening a bakery like she had dreamed. My ultimate dream now too. I think she'd love so many people enjoying her cake. Update. Firstly, I opened my bakery. I found a great spot near my city's office, park, main commuter route to the big city of a caterer takeout deli that closed. We've been open since June, and business has been great with all the morning and evening traffic. And the lunch crowd from the business park. We sell cakes, pastries, breads, buns, etc. Typical bakery stuff. I also have a cook who comes in for a few hours in the morning to do eggs and stuff for breakfast sandwiches and wraps for the office folks. A few weeks after I opened, Jane stopped by. She apologized and confirmed what I and others had suspected. She only cared about the cake recipe because she was jealous of my success with my custom cake business. She'd always wanted to work in food but hated the idea of losing her evenings and working in a high-pressure kitchen. So when I suddenly started doing so well, she thought she could do the same, but didn't know how to start her own catering business. I apologized too for not wanting to share the recipe, but I was afraid that she would ruin my business by putting out bad cakes and no one would want to buy mine either. I then offered to have her come in 3 days a week to offer a soup and stew of the day during the lunch rush. I had the extra kitchen space for it, and soups and stews really do suit her style of cooking to taste. She loved the idea and they were an instant hit. She had complete freedom to create whatever 2 kinds of soup she wanted each day, just adding things on a whim, and they were always delicious. They got very popular quickly with the office folks since there aren't many other takeout options nearby without driving an extra 10 minutes out, besides fast food burger places. We soon expanded to her coming in every weekday and then making a cold soup option on Fridays for the Saturday lunch, closed Sundays. It's been a great arrangement since she keeps her evenings and weekends and gets that creative control. In the last couple weeks, we've also started doing take-home heat and serve dishes too, like lasagna, chicken or steak tacos, or sub kits, etc. I'll do the pasta and bread, she does the other prep and sauces. So far, they've been very popular. She's tried her hand at baking a time or two again, and has declared she just doesn't have the patience for it and hasn't asked for the recipe again, nor has any other family. P.S. For those wondering, Grandma had a standing offer for over a year before she died when she wasn't yet sick enough to stop baking, for anyone to come over and she'd personally walk them through the recipe. She was very sad and disappointed that I was the only one who did so. The other bakers would always make excuses about time or say, later, later. Shortly before she died, she said that since I was the only one who bothered, the recipe was mine now. It's still my best-selling cake. Reddit couldn't help but give themselves a pat on the back in the comments. Marathon Meme said, "Cheers to Reddit producing an ending that is not completely toxic and makes me question the integrity of humanity." Insane Lafat said, "I was expecting the one who started working at her bakery to sneak and steal the recipe, as if she was a baking spy or something." Snow Over Rain said, "I always enjoy the posts that don't end up with OP cutting off their family members, unless they're terrible and deserve it, obviously. Hooray for happy endings." Warm Heart added, "And it was a story about cake that wasn't actually about cheating." OP added, "Honestly, the best part of the story was that it was about actual cake." Ninjas Without Onion said, "The cake is not a lie." Huh? The cake is not a lie comes from one of my fave stories, one of the all-time best of Reddit stories which I have previously read, where a baker confesses she may not do quite as much baking as her clients think. I'll put a link in the description if you missed it. On to my judgment. Definitely not the jerk. A whole year. They had 12 months to go visit Grandma for the recipe, each of them, and Jane just didn't get to it, even though she apparently wanted to work in the food industry. Huh, I'm surprised she lasted at OP's business, given she couldn't take the time to go visit Grandma. OP is full of class. She honored Grandma's dying wish with maximum success and accepted Jane's apology and made space for her in her new business. A truly sweet ending. If you've enjoyed the story and would like to hear more, consider liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. Thanks, and bye for now.